Newspapers generally try to keep themselves out of the news. They don't weigh in to defend their own reporters, for example, unless something very serious has happened. You see when a correspondent is being detained by soldiers at the Tibetan border, for instance, or when someone's been kidnapped by ISIS in Syria. But you generally don't see it in response to criticism from a cable news show. But today, the New York Times made an exception to that rule and jumped ferociously to the defense of its social media reporter, Taylor Lorenz. Now, we told you about Taylor Lorenz last night in a segment about how the most privileged in our society now consider themselves oppressed. And Taylor Lorenz is certainly a shining example of that principle. A New York Times reporter from Greenwich telling you what a victim she is. Earlier this week, Lorenz sent a tweet asking America to celebrate International Women's Day by supporting her specifically, as she faces what she describes as a year-long campaign of harassment. That harassment, Lorenz wrote, has, quote, destroyed my life. Now, normally we'd be deeply sympathetic to this. Harassment is awful. Harassment is a crime, and it should be a crime. If a mob of screaming lunatics showed up at Taylor Lorenz's house and threatened her, we would condemn that mob immediately, no matter what political position they claim to represent. But that's not even close to what Taylor Lorenz is talking about. According to Taylor Lorenz, saying mean things about her on Twitter is, quote, harassment. Disagreeing with her on the internet at all is, quote, harassment. Failing to affirm her as she self-actualizes and attempts to realize her hopes and dreams in this world is, quote, harassment, and so on. There's a lot of real harassment out there. This is not it. So you can see why we included Lorenz in a script about the most privileged in our society, pretending to be the most oppressed in our society. We were embarrassed for Taylor Lorenz. She spends her entire life on the internet, so of course, after a while, you become a deeply unhappy narcissist. That's what the internet does to people. And we assumed her bosses would be embarrassed for her too. Little did we know that they are all exactly just like she is. Well, of course they are, and that's the problem. The people who run the New York Times believe that anyone who disagrees with them is committing assault. Here is their official statement on our segment. In a now familiar move, Tucker Carlson opened his show last night by attacking a journalist. Oh, a journalist! The one protected group left in America. Journalists make their living trying to destroy your life, but if you say a single word about it, you're a criminal, a moral monster. You must be stopped. The statement goes on, and keep in mind, as we read this, we're not making any of it up. Criticizing Taylor Lorenz was, quote, a calculated and cruel tactic which Carlson regularly deploys to unleash a wave of harassment and vitriol at his intended target. It's all pretty amusing when you think about it. Reading a tweet on television, that's fine when it was written by, say, Donald Trump. It's called reporting. But when that tweet was written by a New York Times reporter, reading it out loud is a, quote, calculated and cruel tactic. But calculated to do what exactly? Presumably calculated to get more people to disagree with Taylor Lorenz, which was, they've already established, is harassment. It's a pretty good little scam the New York Times has going. They get to hurt you at will, but you're not allowed to notice. Notice what they're doing, and you are calculated and cruel. We know this because we experienced it this summer. The Times tried to send a reporter to my house just to make absolutely certain that everyone knows where my kids live. I called the paper and told them to back off. There's no news value in where my house is. It's not even a big house. The whole thing was bizarre and creepy as hell, but they ignored the request. The paper only stopped the story when we shamed them on this show. To be clear, we would never even consider running a series on where New York Times editors live. Obviously, that's disgusting. What country is this? But they tried to do it. The best part, though, is what happened after. The Washington Post jumped in naturally with a piece claiming that this show had incited dangerous harassment by asking the New York Times not to write a story about where my house is. We are, quote, endangering reporters. The very same reporters who are trying to write a piece about my house. It was all so passive-aggressive and crazy that we were happy when the whole thing ended. But then just today, the official New York Times Twitter account sent out that same Washington Post story. The New York Times described it as a, quote, anatomy of an attack by Carlson that had real-world consequences. It was pure insanity. But that's still not the most amazing part of the Taylor Lorenz story. The greatest irony of all is what Taylor Lorenz herself does for a living. According to the New York Times statement today, quote, Taylor Lorenz is a talented New York Times journalist doing timely and essential reporting. Timely and essential, okay. Thanks for the adjectives. But what kind of reporting is it exactly? What does Taylor Lorenz do all day? We could answer that question at some length. But instead, we decided to back off a little bit and invite Sean Davis of The Federalist, who's followed this subject very closely. We're happy to have him tonight. Sean Davis, thanks so much for coming on. Tell us, now that we know that Taylor Lorenz is not only having her life destroyed because people disagree with her, but it's even more destroyed because we pointed out that it's destroyed because people are disagreeing with her. What does Taylor Lorenz do for a living exactly?
It's a great question. I think she would say she writes about internet culture and tech, when in reality, she's actually the journalism equivalent of the creeper cruising by the schoolyard asking the kids if they want any free attention in the New York Times. She stalks teenagers on the internet. And this isn't my opinion. She says as much. And she even talks about how if she were a dude doing what she were doing, people would think it's kind of creepy. And in the interest of equality, I would just like Taylor Lorenz to know what you're doing is creepy. It has nothing to do with what gender you are or you're not.
So when you say, and I know that she had reached out personally to the daughter, the 15-year-old daughter of a former Trump administration official, and spoke to her personally without talking to her parents first. I didn't even know that was legal. You're telling me she's done that with other children?
Right, and she admits as much, that she sometimes finds it difficult to really get what the kids really want to tell her because sometimes the parents get involved. Now remember, this is a reporter, a journalist, whatever you want to call her, who doxed the children of a free speech activist who was literally targeted for assassination by ISIS in Garland, Texas. So what she's doing, some people might call it journalism. I would call it garbage with no real value whatsoever. She harasses kids and teenagers and gets them to say things so she can basically mine them for clicks.
What's so interesting, and maybe we shouldn't be surprised at this point, is that she's accusing her critics of doing precisely the same thing that she does for a living, which is to invade people's privacy and hurt them on purpose, it sounds like.
Exactly. She went after tech titan Mark Andreessen, one of the founders of Netscape, and accused him not once but twice of saying things on Clubhouse, a conference call platform, things he never ever said. She accused him of using a slur, and when she got called out for that, she doubled down and later accused him of allegedly plotting with a white supremacist on Clubhouse to take her down, something that didn't happen because not only did he not even speak in this particular conversation, he certainly didn't bring anything up about white supremacists. And what happens is when these little Bolshevik totalitarians get mad at you and accuse you of harassing them or being violent, what they actually want is to avoid any accountability for their own actions. They use their identity as a sword and a shield. I can say things against you because of my identity, but if you come after me, you can't do that because of my identity. It's disgusting.
Well, they are not aggressive. They're passive aggressive. They're not canine, they're feline. And I have to say, just to be totally honest and trying to be paternal and sympathetic, if you're tweeting out that your life is being destroyed, you need to take a break. Don't you think? I mean, I'm just being serious. I mean, you need to take a break and step back maybe from your job, whatever it is, because, you know, the healthy people don't write things like that, I don't think, on the internet. Do they?
Well, I don't think adults do. And I get it, real harassment, real threats, there's no place for that. But people saying mean things about you on the internet, maybe you should be an adult and just ignore it.
Yeah, why don't you get off the stupid internet? I've found a lot of joy in that. It's great to see you tonight. Sean Davis.
You too, thank you.
Well, before the